Hello, my lovelies. We're going to be talking about the topic of sacred prostitution. So I'm going to be identifying what that is, and I'm going to give the historical or her historical background. I'm also going to talk about how you can identify sacred prostitutes today and what the magic or the healing is behind that. And I'm going to disprove or debunk some of the concepts and some of the really, I would say, taboo issues behind prostitution, because what we see in modern day prostitution is not the same type of thing as the sacred prostitution or the temple prostitution of old, which was the original prostitution. And there was a lot of power and spiritual healing behind that. Nowadays, prostitution is meant to objectify and it's meant to fulfill basic carnal lusts without any of the spiritual or energetic power behind that or benefit. So we're going to get into it. So what are sacred prostitutes? Sacred prostitutes, historically or historically, were temple priestesses of various different types of goddesses. Usually it was within the Sumerian, Babylonian, Hebrew, Egyptian, and Hindu type pantheons and practices. So it depended on the culture at the time period, and the goddesses being worshipped. But essentially what it went back to was honoring the divine feminine, honoring the dark primordial womb and the mother, honoring that power that through the womb came life, and also through the womb came awakening or godheadness. Okay, whether that is feminine or masculine, female or male, that's not really the point, because the whole point of it is that when we are in touch with that level of energy, when we are in touch with the primordial womb or the primordial mother, there's really nothing else that's needed for the awakening process. So what these women would do is they would make love to men, or sometimes even other women, depending, or it could be an orgy type of situation or group situation, to honor the divine mother goddess and her life-giving capability, her ability to have a womb as a portal that brought in life, which is reflected the women on earth. So this would be sort of a as above, so below type of representational magic. These women were trained in the arts of different types of tantric schools, so it would depend on the culture. But usually the goddesses that were dealt with would be, I don't know why, but Nephthys just came through, so I feel like that might be something there. Wasn't something that I had heard previously, but it just came through. Also, some of the goddesses that would be dealt with this would be like Ishtar, Inanna, Ashara, among many others. Also Aphrodite, Venus. So these are just some of the goddesses. And again, this goes across cultures. So a lot of cultures had their version of sacred prostitutes. Could have also been known in China as the white tigress, for example. So there were many different types of temple priestesses that would practice this level of sacred prostitution. So again, it would fulfill two things. One, it would honor the goddess, and they were in service to the goddess. And two, it could be used where they could actually heal men and even women of various different types of conditions and activate their Kundalini, which is the highest honor. They would activate the Kundalini because they themselves would be Kundalini awakened, in most cases because they would train in these arts, which would activate the Kundalini. So then once that Kundalini was activated, they knew how to raise it up, and then it would become a Kundalini awakened situation. And then they would be able to activate the Kundalini in whomever visited the temple. And quite often, those that visited the temple were there to honor the goddess as well, in most cases. So this was then perverted and turned on its ass, and really, I want to say just outright smear campaigned by, the Catholic Church, by certain other monotheistic nations and religions. Also, you can even read about it in the Bible that a lot of the Hebrew sects can, condemn this practice as well. Islam condemned this practice as well, but basically they were very intimidated by the woman's power. And this was also representative of matriarchy being replaced by patriarchy over time. So when this happened, this was very common, where the women began to be hunted down, they were killed. Even when you had the witch hunts and the witch trials much later in history, or her story, right? This was mostly done to shut up what remained of, you know, the doulas, what remained of the midwives, what remained of the herbalists, what remained of the witch doctors, what remained of those independent, strong, sexually charged healing women, which previously had been honored and uplifted and considered, you know, goddesses in their society, but now were considered defamed, were considered whores, and were lumped together with common prostitutes as well, were lumped together as devil worshippers and things of that nature. Now, there is something to that too, because there are cultural practices, specifically dealing in pagan religions, where women would deal with different types of horned male beings, you know, such as Dionysus or Cernunnos, or Pan, but there were also horned goddess deities as well. And if you're interested in learning more about that, I do have a video on that on this channel as well, if you want to check it out. In fact, I will link it at the very end of this video, so you guys can click on it. But the whole idea is to honor the primal aspect, to honor the wild woman or wild man. Because remember, the Kundalini is activated within the root and the sacral. It is activated in the base. If we cannot honor our sexuality, which is the current of creation and destruction, if we can't honor that, then how can we expect to awaken and ascend to higher dimensions and higher realms? So if we consider sexuality, which was always supposed to be a creative, powerful current, something dirty, something ugly, instead of honoring it and honoring that primal nature and honoring that sexual nature and that sexual power, that is where true healing and transformation lies. Because listen, even the sign Scorpio, which is again ruled by the genitals, right? That whole region, that pelvic bone, that whole design that looks like a scorpion, that is connected to the Kundalini. The whole concept of sexual power is spiritual power. And what is Scorpio? Sex, death, and transformation. And what current do I always tell you guys that I operate on, right? Sex and death, which is essentially creation, destruction, life and death, and the rebirth cycle. So this is not something to be afraid of. This is not something to run from. This is something to embrace. Now, I want to talk about how you can identify somebody who sort of falls into that, I guess you would call it an archetype or a role, or has certain traits that are sacred prostitution traits. People who are sacred prostitutes in this lifetime will tend to be either priestesses, literally, dealing with very sexually powerful and independent type goddess archetypes or epithets, okay? And although this was not traditionally the case, Lilith is a common one that a lot of women are falling under, because back in the day, Lilith typically, you know, the Lilitu were, you know, honored and revered as storm spirits. But Lilith, who has transformed from what they would consider a creature of the night into goddess, into the dark goddess archetype, which is a beautiful transformation and expansion and really acknowledgement of that power, that dark moon Lilith power. She wasn't typically revered in this way historically, but is now being revered as this way as an icon of this type of energy. So yes, you could work with her. You wouldn't have to work with any of those other energies or spirits to sort of embody this. You wouldn't have to be a priestess of hers. Now, a lot of people are not just priestesses. They are embodying the current. They are, I mean, the priestesses embodied the current, but they were more so teaching others and directing it among like a coven type situation, a temple type situation, a house type situation. But here's the situation. A lot of people are straight up activating fully their goddess nature in this regard. So we're transcending from priestesses and priests into gods and goddesses. But I digress. It's just another level of archetype. And many of us have already transcended beyond that into the primordial womb, which is really what the sacred prostitution was honoring at its core, and was stimulating the Kundalini awakening, which would ultimately lead us back to that. So how to identify, I digress. How to identify a modern day sacred prostitute as somebody who operates or works with those type of energy currents. They may dress a little more on edge, okay, a little more sexual. And I don't mean, because there is sort of this overt sexuality that's very compulsive, it's very shallow. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about there will be this very womanly, very seductive, but very healing sexual energy. Now, when a sacred prostitute is young, they do tend to actually be very promiscuous. They can grow up in a background of dealing with sexual abuse. And so in the beginning of their journey, they have to learn how to heal themselves. They're supposed to heal the scarring, the emotional and spiritual and sometimes literal scarring into that powerful chalice, right? With that being said, sacred prostitutes will tend to start out being like caught up in that sexual current, mostly because a lot of men would have been drawn to them at an early age, which might have led to, molestation, incest, rape. And I'm not saying that's always the case. And I'm not saying that it's nothing that is their fault. It is that they're here to heal, like this deep sexual healing within their family bloodlines, but also they're there to heal themselves, and they're there to activate that healing in others via their sex organs. So at their core, a sacred prostitute can have sex with a man and can activate his Kundalini. I'm actually going to attach an example, by the way, of when I did this. He's not the first person I activated, but he's the first person that I actually caught on camera. So I'm going to show this. You'll be able to identify them usually by having a past of sexual abuse or sexual exploration. Then they heal themselves. They find out that their true power lies in their sexuality, but not in a way that is just to, seduce and control or anything like that. Not that there's anything wrong with seduction or sexual domination, but that's not the end all be all. The point of it is actually to heal, to activate, to spiritually awaken the person that the sacred prostitute is intimate with. So it's not supposed to be this like self, destructive or plainly selfish act, or just for the sake of carnal pleasure, although those things are a wonderful part of it, right? Consider it more of a byproduct of the point of spiritual transformation and healing via the womb, because the sacred prostitute is not a modern prostitute. She is not there to satisfy the lower urges of men. She is there to satisfy his deep spiritual thirst. She is there to satisfy his spiritual awakening. She is there to activate and stir within him what has always been dormant, but he had all along. So that in a nutshell is how you would identify a sacred prostitute. Typically, she will have a pattern of having, several relationships. Maybe she's a serial monogamist. Maybe she's in polyamory. She might be bisexual. All of this could be simply because she's supposed to heal or activate or come into different people's lives literally via her womb. Now, sometimes sacred prostitutes can have reverse vortex things going on where instead of they're imparting their healing or activating, they can actually draw into their womb, and they can actually take sexual energy from another person, even absorb their traumas, even absorb some of their shadows. She can do this consciously or unconsciously, and this is part of the process too, because before somebody can be stimulated or activated within their Kundalini, they have to clear out what's been blocking them. And again, this is not to say, I'm not saying, okay, men, go off and find a sacred prostitute so you can awaken. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that there is a spiritual significance to this type of archetype. This is a role that very specific women played throughout the ages in order to spiritually heal, in order to demonstrate the power and cycles of the primordial womb of creation and destruction. So yes, if if it is written within that sacred prostitute's soul contract to intertwine with you, and she wishes to do so and she feels inclined to do so, consider yourself blessed. A lot of women possess this. This is not as rare as it used to be, because more and more women are realizing their sexual power. More and more women are healing themselves. And an unhealed sacred prostitute can be very damaging. So just to be aware of that, if you ever come together with someone, it's a sacred act, regardless whether you treat it as such or not. And there is a deep energy exchange and even DNA, multidimensional exchange taking place. So it's not something to take lightly, right? Now, sexuality should never be suppressed. It should be explored however you feel you need to explore it. But I wanted to sort of bring clarity and enlightenment to this topic that I feel is largely misunderstood and in most cases unknown. When people think of prostitute, what do you think of? Someone that sells their ass for money, right? And that's no disrespect. I was a literal prostitute for a few years, and it was due to drug addiction. That's another thing too. Sacred prostitutes will often find themselves in prostitution. They'll often find themselves to be exotic dancers. They'll find themselves to be escorts. I'm not saying all these things are the same or on the same level. I'm just saying that this will tend to be what happens. And these are all choices that a woman has. So I'm not knocking any of this, but I'm just saying that sacred prostitution and modern prostitution are two different things, or not to be confused. But a lot of sacred prostitutes will start in what would be considered modern prostitution before she has a chance to unlock her ability and heal herself. So that's basically it on the topic of sacred prostitution. If you guys have any questions, don't hesitate to leave them in the comment section below. Obviously, some, depending on if they're appropriate or not to the topic, obviously I'm not going to answer. But if you have serious questions, for growth and I can answer, I will definitely answer. And if I can't, I will try to point you in the direction where somebody else can answer you. So I hope that this resonated with you guys. I hope that it was enlightening. Definitely, take what resonates and leave the rest, as I always say. Take care. Until next time. Check out my website, thetantricdragoness.com, to book a private akashic reading or any other reading. Also, akashic portraits, consultations, shamanic journeys, starseed charts, primordial dragon fire healing, and much more. You can also subscribe to Patreon to learn how to do a lot of this yourself through various templates I've designed. Activate Diamond Consciousness, Activate the Black Flame, Journey the Underworld, Tantric Healing and BDSM, Astral Projection and Power, Shields, Cloaks, Wards, Learning Light Language, Exclusive and Premier Readings, Soul Fragment Retrieval, Advanced Ancestral Work, Creating Your Own Shamanic Sanctuary, and much more. Thanks for your support, and stay tuned for future videos.